All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Mr. Gloat podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are coming to you live, and it's time for the history of women's professional boxing, the road to the undisputed light heavyweight championship of the world. Now, we'll talk about information about everything else, about Nelson Heisa calling out Moses Atama after his win some days ago. And we'll talk about anything else that would involve who will be the next champion, talking about who's this, who's that. Do we have anything for Shakur Stevenson? Do we have anything for Kenshiro Taraji? And even for Deontay Wilder and his fight that's also coming in a couple weeks? Well, probably for the best to save all of that information some other time. Because we have the Women's Boxing Championship. And to be honest, guys, it's probably for the best because, guys, ever since my impergnosity told me that maybe the heavyweight division isn't the only thing that we should worry about women's boxing, but we should worry about the other weight class. The one that a lot of people might not want to talk about because maybe it doesn't exist after all. But it does. It sure does. First things first, I will point this out, that there is no such thing as an IBO belt because, as looking up information, there has been 0 IBF or IBO belt title fights in the light heavyweight division. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. But that won't stop me from even trying to find a few diamonds in the rough. Diamonds that should be forever. But when it comes to anyone that believes that world championship boxers should deserve to get the attention, the gratification, the testicular fortitude, but when it comes to the world of boxing, you have to understand one thing that people don't really talk about much today. And that is the titles that used to be major back then, but not anymore. And to be honest, the odds of them being legit now is ridiculous because when you come up to it, people won't understand what you're saying because in hindsight, it doesn't really exist anymore because no one cares about talking about it anymore. And you people that are still here right now might understand what I'm talking about. I am talking about the championship belts that existed before the 4-belt era became a thing. I'm talking about the WIBF, the IWBF, the WIBA, and the IBA. So let's get into it. The IWBF is International Women's Boxing Federation. The other one is Women's International Boxing Federation, which is the same thing. It only just has women in the first row and international in the other one, so it's similar, but yet again, there's two different ones. It's international women's or women's international, only the same, just two different. So, but they're different. They're not the same. And of course, the women's IBA and the original IBA. And to be honest, guys, these belts were a thing before the time that boxing would give us new world titles. Now, keep this in mind, guys. In 2004, the WBA and WBC were formed for some of the weight classes in women's boxing at the time. 5 years later, in 2009, the IBF and WBO would later come in to the world of boxing for women as well. So undisputed champions were in 2004 to 2009 in the 2-belt era for women, and then 2009, all 4 belts. Got it? Good. but not in the 1990s because, guys, I've already talked about this history in the Women's Undisputed Heavyweight Championship and talked about the history about the IBF or the Women's IBF and the other titles and how they were formed in Florida and another one formed it. So I'm not going to repeat myself. But the only thing I will point out is that the first ever light heavyweight title fight came in September the 17th, 1999 in Panama City, Panama, where Kathy Rivers versus Valerie Mahfoud. I had talked about Kathy Rivers before, and she did got notice about how she lost a fight in her last fight by controversial moments. A woman that just couldn't catch a break from getting a title shot or even win would fight against Valerie Mahfoud. And surprisingly, this was for the IWBF and the WIBF. Women's IBF and the International Women's BF. And surprisingly, this was for the inaugural 2 belts that were inaugural that day. And surprisingly, after over a bunch of slew of rounds, Valerie Mahfoud found her mark in competition. She was wrangling everything into this fight, and to be honest, she was putting in better work than Kathy Rivers did, and she decided to finish off in the 10th and final round by 32 seconds in the 10th round, which it was 10 2-minute rounds back then, and she won the belts, and Valerie Mahfoud got the job done, and that was the start for boxing. Now, Kathy Rivers was already in a somewhat of a slow career for herself because by May 27th of 99, a few months before Kathy Rivers and Mahfoud had for the title shots, they actually had their first 6-round fight in Tunico Gold Strike Casino, where Kathy Rivers dominated the 6-round fight against Valerie, but for some reason, Valerie started dominating Kathy. So, and even though Valerie had a 5-3 record, with Kathy a 7-2 record. So, and keep this in mind, Kathy Rivers was a 6-foot-tall woman, so she was built properly in the division. So, for how she lost in this rematch for the light heavyweight titles, I'll never know, because Valerie was 5'8", so I guess that did help her, and she started learning that in the next fight, and she did. Unfortunately, guys, these titles would not come into play for long, because in September the 24th, 2004, 5 years after that came, the International Women's Boxing Federation would come back as a vacant title in the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, with Gwendolyn O'Neill from Guyana, I have talked about her a good amount of times, would fight for the title against the one and only Laila Ali. And Laila Ali would come out, knock her down a bunch of times, and win the fight by a round 3 KO. But unfortunately, around that time, she decided to stay out of it and start boxing in the super middleweight. And surprisingly, around that time is when the WBC and WBA belts were coming. So she would win one of the belts at the time during her final few years in boxing until February of 2007 with an undefeated record of 24 wins and 21 knockouts. As for the women's IBF belt, this belt would also disappear as well in February the 18th, 2006, where this time Valerie Mahfoud would try to fight back that title in the LJVM Coliseum in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, against Ijeoma Egbunin. A woman from Nigeria came into the fight, and for out of nowhere, she pulls out an amazing victory. And even though she had one loss in her career by a close 6-round fight, she came into this fight and dominated Valerie by a 2nd-round KO. Now, keep this in mind, guys. Valerie, since she had a 6-3 record after her win for those titles in 99, her record at February of 2006 was a record of 19-10-2. Not good. So her prime was gone before you know it. And as for Gioma, she would actually later become the number one ranked boxer on BoxRec as number one in the light heavyweight. So yeah, but around that time, guys, there is one piece of information that did make her box pound for pound because of it. Of course, the rest of her career, she lost another fight by a first-round knockout against Laura Ramsey, a really dangerous fighter at the time, and a really dangerous one. But she continued fighting on interesting fighters like Lisa Eston and had an undefeated fighter against Lilatila Robinson, a woman that did defeat Valerie Mahfoud around the time of their career, but her undefeated record came to an end by Iojimo. And she defeated Gwendolyn O'Neill in 2011 after a 2-year hiatus and never fought again. But as for the belts, as for the women's IBF belts and the International Women's Boxing Federation, those titles disappeared and they never came again. But the women's IBA belt actually lasted a good amount of time. In December the 14th, 2001, in the PA Convention Center in Philadelphia, Suzetta Taylor met an interesting figure in boxing. That woman's name was Jacque Fraser Litt. Jacque Fraser was the daughter of Joe Frazier. And fun fact, before this fight took place for the inaugural women's IBA belt, she had an undefeated record of a huge amount. She had 7 wins, 7 by knockout, and she was a dominator until June of 2008, live in Verona and Turning Stone Resort in a casino. She took up against a 9-0 boxer with 8 knockouts. Her name was Laila Ali. And surprisingly, Muhammad Ali's daughter, that would later become the IBF champion of heavyweight, light heavyweight, we just talked about some minutes ago, she would go into this 8-round fight. And this was the first time a woman versus woman as daughters of their fathers that fought each other in the 70s. That's crazy. Now, this was an 8-round fight. It was a non-title fight, but they went into this fight. Unfortunately, Jacque Fraser was 39 years old, 5'9", while 5'10" Laila Ali was 23 years old. So, but still, yet again, with knockout records, that's pretty dangerous. The 8-round fight came in with no trouble to spare, and after 8 rounds, Laila won the fight by majority decision. It was one of her toughest fights of all time, and a couple of the scorecards were close. One had it favored for Ali easily, and Ali stated as refusal to be intimidated, where Fraser was using up her interesting sounds, where Ali, long after the bell sounded, where Fraser hit Ali after the end of round 4, which had an interesting moment. Fun fact, Muhammad Ali was in Brooklyn, Michigan for a cameo appearance for a NASCAR event at the time, which was kind of interesting. Also, Fraser did have a little bit of a swelling due to one of her left eyes at the time. But anyway, both girls got unscathed. And then several...
Oh, so
Shut the fuck up. I'm tired of this damn thing playing all the time. Jeez. But then 6 months later, on December the 14th, Laila fought for the women's IBA World Light Heavyweight title and won by round 4 TKO. The woman had 11-5-1 record and nothing much. By June of 2002, she had a no contest where they had an unintentional headbutt against her opponent and they couldn't continue after the end of round 3. Had a rematch, which was for an Intercontinental Super Middleweight women's IBF title, and a month or so, a few weeks later, she took on another undefeated fighter, won the fight, fought for the women's IBF's World Super Middleweight title in December that year of 2002, won the fight. But this was the moment when, after the end of 2002, her knockout ratios came to an end due to that decision. Later in 2003, she won a fight, but then she took a long-term hiatus. She used to be 167, and then she gained 19 pounds in over a year and a half until August of the 31st, 2004 against a nobody. went 4 rounds the distance, and then took on Marianne Allmager, a really dangerous opponent she fought 10 days later after the 4-round fight against the jobber she fought, winning the UBA World Women's Heavyweight title, which I don't know if that exists, but the fight was close, but she barely won, but she never boxed again. The only loss in her record was Layla Ali, and technically, that's about it. But what about the women's IBA belt? Well, she never defended it. It was stripped away from her until then. The belt never came back until May the 8th, 2004, until it was vacant, also with the inaugural IBA belt that was also meant that night as well, where Vonda Ward, an undefeated female star with the Star Spangled and Bangers, 18-0, took on 16-1 Ann Wolfe. The fight ended in the first round, and that's all I have to say about it. It was bullcrap. I hate every bit of it. I hate the fight. I hate the fight. Let's ignore it. But you want to know the only thing I can't ignore? Weeks after that fight in Mississippi that ended Vonda Ward's undefeated record, fucked up. Gwendolyn O'Neal and Kathy Rivers were fighting for the women's IBA world title about 21 days after Ann Wolfe scored that first round knockout in Guyana. The fight took place in Guyana because Gwendolyn O'Neal is from Guyana. And Kathy Rivers had another title fight for this. Lost by 10 rounds of unanimous decision against O'Neal. And then that belt was gone for a while. But then, surprisingly, around this time in June of 18th, 2005, Ann Wolfe retained her IBA title against Marcia Valley by round 6 TKO. And then 2 months later, on August the 20th, she fought against Valerie Mahfoud, a time when her record was going downhill, when her career was done. Scored a 10-round unanimous decision, which was pretty good. Which also, fun fact, Valerie Mahfoud was the only woman that defeated Ann Wolfe, so this was like a revenge fight for Ann Wolfe. Also, fun fact, the women's IBA belt was also vacant that same night, which made Ann Wolfe again 2-time women's IBA and IBA title again. But sadly, the next year in 2006, Ann Wolfe had 2 non-title fights, and she retired for good. And this is the moment when women's boxing in the light heavyweight was done. Yes, Valerie Mahfoud and the other fight in 2006 for that IBF belt was there, but that was it. Yeah. And also the IBA belt, after Ann Wolfe retired, the IBA belt was gone. The women's IBA belt would have a couple more fights in 2008 on June the 6th, live in Sint Maarten, a country that I really don't know much about, which was fought by Gwendolyn O'Neal versus Carlette Uel, a really dangerous heavyweight. I'll tell you who that woman is. I couldn't find any information about the fight or the judges or what the scorecards was. All I know is it took place from a country that makes no sense. And the fight ended in a 10-round split decision, making Gwendolyn O'Neal the champion again. But then on November the 1st, that same year, they went back to the same country again, this time for the WIBC, Women's International Boxing Council light heavyweight title, and with a rematch. And Carlette Uel won the rematch against Gwendolyn O'Neal. As for that WIBC thing, I can't find information about that, so let's ignore that. But as for the women's IBA belt, that was it. And by that time, by the end of 2000s, ever since because like I said before, guys, by 2009, the IBF and the WBO belt also came into play, which meant women would fight for the WBC, WBA, IBF, WBO title that the organizations that work for the men of boxing would give women the titles, meaning that these titles I talked about disappeared. To be honest, guys, I really can't say much about it. And technically, I even had to get a drink of water. But there is more to it than meets the eye. I'll tell you that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Considering that those titles disappeared for a good amount of time because they never came back to the light heavyweight again, the heavyweight division for women's boxing would actually still be alive. Now, I have looked up BoxRec since 2012 to 2016, before I came back and did it again in 2019. The light heavyweight division for women's boxing seemed like it magically disappeared. I tried to look up who was ranked as pound for pound in BoxRec, but the light heavyweight seemed like it disappeared. Like, don't get me wrong, like once in a few months, guys, even in 2014, when there were some female boxers in the heavyweight, there were times that there were fighters that were fighting in the heavyweight. But then suddenly, when looking up the rankings, I would just say to myself, I'll type in rankings, type in women or females, heavyweight, click, and there'll be no sheet. No one was there. Same thing for the light heavyweight. So I questioned that boxing just wasn't legit. Not ever since when Vonda Ward retired for good in 2008, just seemed like this division was gone. But for some reason, there were some boxers in the heavyweight for women that were making an interesting impact in their career. Whether you think it was good or not, but that's up to you to decide, because I found out that there was more to this than meets the eye. Because even though the WBC belt for women in the heavyweight was the only belt that was fought for, surprisingly, other belts would later come into play by the end of the decade. For all due to respect. Because on March the 30th, 2019. Now, the light heavyweight division in women's boxing would come back into play in 2017 when there were times that I looked up BoxRec once in a while and I would see the rankings, and then months later they disappeared. But then on March the 30th, 2019, a full decade after that last fight in Saint-Martin when Carla Uel defeated O'Neal in their rematch, the WBO Women's Light Heavyweight title would be the inaugural belt for the 4-belt category for women in the light heavyweight. Giovanna Perez versus Lonnie Daniels. Now, we all know Lonnie Daniels, an undefeated woman with a surprising record in her career, but yet again, is it worth it? Is her record that good? Well, in all due to respect, Lonnie Daniels put out her running career as a huge stepping stone. She built up a couple wins in her career until she took on Giovanna Perez in March 2018 and lost by split decision for a New Zealand title. Now, Giovanna Perez lost her first fight in her debut, and that would be the only time she would ever lose her fight. But for some reason, after Giovanna defeated Daniels and had not much of other interesting fights, a year later, she fought for the inaugural belt and won the rematch against Daniels. And then in October the 4th, after March the 30th that same year, she fought her first and only fighter out of New Zealand. And even though Giovanna Perez is also a woman born in Brazil, living in New Zealand, so you can call her a Brazilian champion, living in New Zealand, representing New Zealand, she took on Claire Hefner from Canada, and she scored her first ever and only knockout by a round 8 TKO after the end of round 8. Defending the belt, and then for some reason, in January the 26th, 2021, Perez retired from professional boxing. But that's not it. No. Because, of course, around that time in 2019, Lonnie Daniels also went to the heavyweight division and also brought in the IBF title, which by 2023 is when they brought in. But before that belt existed, and by the way, guys, just to let you viewers know, the WBC belt does not exist in women's boxing. And to be honest, the WBC is the only belt that does not exist in any of the weight classes, because the WBC light heavyweight is the only alphabetical title that does not exist in any women's boxing. Now, you can count the Ring Magazine titles of heavyweight and light heavyweight because the Ring Magazines don't exist neither, but I do question why. But of course, 3 months after Giovanna Perez retired her belt, April the 17th, 2021, the one and only fight. A fight to death. And it was death. Live in Costa Rica, Martha Patricia Lara Gayton, a record with 11 wins and 9 losses, fights for the WBA light heavyweight title and the WBC world heavyweight title against Hannah Gabriels. And Gabriels defeated her by round 2 TKO in the final seconds of the fight, becoming a 3-weight class champion. Yeah, she won 2 weight belts. And guys, that's one thing I do like to point out. And also, guys, one other thing. As for the WBA belt as well, yes, even though the WBC does not exist, by May of 2023, Hannah Gabriels would actually relinquish the title when trying to fight against Claressa Shields for her middleweight titles undisputed that year in June of 2023. She failed a drug test, and she hasn't boxed for 3 years until December 2024. And Claressa Shields had to take on someone else. Yeah. But what else happened then? Well, to be honest, around that time, the IBF belt would actually be an inaugural belt, because around that time in May, Lonnie Daniels fought for the inaugural IBF World Heavyweight title, and she defended it around that time in 2023. She stripped the belt in December the 15th, 2 weeks after she won the inaugural IBF Light Heavyweight title against Ari Melissia. Amazing. She even, wait, was it Arwen? No, wait, no, that was the IBF heavyweight title. No. The real IBF light heavyweight title was against Desley Robinson on December the 2nd. She defended the title in September the 7th against a Nigerian woman, which I'm not going to talk about anymore because she's a bust. But of course, that belt hasn't been fought since. But hey, Lonnie Daniels helped out the IBF to fight in those 2 weight divisions. Amazing. But here's the problem, guys, I do want to point out. When looking up boxing and the world heavyweight titles, I do find one interesting thing about the fight against Hannah Gabriels versus Martha Gayton. Now, guys, in BoxRec, or in the pound for pound. Now, guys, pound for pound boxers in the women's division, the heavyweight division is at 175 pounds plus to be in the heavyweight for women's boxing. But it also says plus you can be over 168 pounds to the past the light heavyweight division to fight for a heavyweight title. Even though the super middleweight division, you had to fight under 168 pounds. Light heavyweight, under 175 pounds. They got rid of the cruiserweight division, thank God. But the heavyweight is at 175 pounds over. But it's okay to fight under 175 pounds and over 168 pounds if you want to fight for a heavyweight title. Why am I talking about this? Does any of this make sense? Well, let me answer this. Because that night on April the 17th, 2021, when Gabriels defeated Martha Gayton, Gabriels weighed 177 and a quarter pounds over heavyweight. Martha, 176. fighting for a WBC heavyweight title and a WBA light heavyweight title, that makes no sense. They should have. Why did they not bring the WBA world heavyweight title, but they decided to give them a WBA light heavyweight title? That makes no sense. None of that makes sense. And guys, even the WBF world heavyweight title had a little bit of controversy as well in the past as well, because the WBF title also had fought by Natalia Rogozina, a undisputed two belt error in 2004 and 2005. She was the first ever undisputed super middleweight champion in the two belt era. And then before she retired after 2009, she took on Pamela London, a 237-pound woman with beef, while Rogozina, a tall woman, almost 6 feet tall Russian, was fighting at 172. She wasn't even in the heavyweight. She was light heavyweight. And she won the fight, but that's ridiculous. And it even gets more ridiculous because, listen to this. After all of that happened, and it only gets crazier, because after the end of 2023, when some people like myself thought, or maybe one person, and that's me, I thought there weren't going to be a lot of interesting information that was going to happen in the division at that moment. I wasn't really expecting it. On July the 20th, 2024, the WBA would come back. 1 year after Hannah Gabriels got relinquished to the title, and after that drug test fail, that cost her that rematch against Claressa Shields. Keep that in mind. Chi Connealy, a young 6 foot tall, well-built woman at 170, a married woman, comes out of boxing in 2023. Even after she retired, she comes back, scores some interesting wins and debuts, and has a undefeated record, not an interesting resume. In her 5th professional fight on July the 20th, 2024, at 170 and a quarter, takes on a 174 and a quarter pound past prime fighter named Angie Paola Rocha, a past prime Colombian woman that should never be in the title fight, but she did. And even though the only YouTube videos I can find on YouTube is their ring walks and the person announcing the winner while picking up their winner. And that was Chi Connealy, that won by round 3 TKO. There is no footage of the fight. What is going on in today's boxing? Why is there no footage of people watching the fight? I don't get it. I don't get it. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. It makes no sense. And yes, she is going to fight in July the 25th next month against Aroe Melicia, the IBF title contender that fought against Lonnie Daniels. But that's not important right now. But still, at least they were under 175 pounds and over 168 pounds. So at least the fight was a light heavyweight title. Give them credit for that. But then 7 days later, after that fight, live from Little Caesars Arena in Detroit, Michigan, Vanessa Lepage, WBC champion, fought against Claressa Shields. Yeah. And you can say to yourself, they were only fighting for the WBC title. Yes. But the WBF heavyweight title was also on the line. But in defense, here's the thing. Now, Vanessa Lepage was 174 and a half, but Claressa Shields and other people believe that she was over 200 pounds, overweight, but boxing at the time said she was under that pound. Claressa Shields was 174 and 3/4. So technically, they weren't even at 175 pounds or over to be in the heavyweight. But it was for the WBC heavyweight title. Claressa Shields won by round 2 TKO, and even for the WBF title. But after they were giving them the WBC merch, they gave her the WBO World Light Heavyweight title. And one of the commentators pointed that out, that there were no, like, the titles were different. But one of the commentators pointed out that this was the similarity to Sugar Ray Leonard defeating Donnie Lalonde in 1988, winning two pieces, one of them that was a super middleweight title and one that was a light heavyweight title, making Claressa Shields the first to do that since Sugar Ray Leonard. But that doesn't make sense because Hannah Gabriels did that 3 years ago. I know that Hannah Gabriels and those titles weren't live on television or on DAZN, just like Claressa Shields did against Lepage, but still, you should learn that information. Guys, if I was learning this already, I should have been the announcer that night to talk about this because people have to know about this. But the problem was these girls were under 175 pounds, so this should be for light heavyweight title. The WBO light heavyweight title kind of made sense for being there. Seriously. Now, of course, Claressa Shields got rid of that belt after March of 2025, 1 month after a win against Danielle Perkins, and that was it. And of course, the WBO belt has been vacated. The WBC does not exist yet. Lonnie Daniels and Chi Connealy still have their own titles. So here's my final question before ending this podcast, because at this moment, I have nothing left to say. Should the light heavyweight division give respect to any of the females that deserve the champion? Guys, should we give Chi Connealy, Hannah Gabriels, Lonnie Daniels, Claressa Shields, Giovanna Perez, Valerie Mahfoud, Layla Ali, or even Ijeoma, Ann Wolfe, Gwendolyn O'Neill, Carlette Well, Jack Q. Frazier respect for winning a piece of the light heavyweight title? My answer is that is you have to. Like, what happened back in the 90s and early 2000s, those titles might not exist anymore, but they should. And even the titles that do exist right now, we have to give credit to it. The only thing I am a little bit upset about is that last week ago, since Katali Ortiz got robbed by Franchon Cruz for that super middleweight fight when she should have won, got controversial. The only thing I still question about that is that when watching the fight, I was looking at two misbaked potato heads with big guts. Now, keep this in mind, guys. A man and a woman's body is different than you think. Us men have our own bodies straight down to the line, while women are supposed to be built as this, as an hourglass. So when you have a 5'8" woman at 166 pounds that won by a controversial decision, and another woman, a Mexican woman named Ortiz that was 5'3", 168, too short, and she was fighting for a title in a super middleweight, that does question me a lot. And I do question that there's not a lot of women in the division. And it makes it less entertaining for us men to watch grown, big, I'm not talking about fat women, but I'm talking about women that look like sumo wrestlers or some that look like Nia Jax from WWE that have that overweight body. Because why would we want to pay money to see that? It just almost ruins the business of wrestling. And I don't want that to happen to all women of boxing, because the only thing entertaining to it is that there's not a lot of females in the division. Just like Claressa Shields pointed out to other people that the women's division is not that big for what she's doing, depending on the resume. It should be out of competition, the similar way for why men in USA men's soccer is dominating women's USA soccer team by 30 goals to 0, because women do not have balls of skills to juggle out balls, because us men are better than them, but we still suck at the FIFA World Cup, but women don't. And that just suffers as a result. And it does have a lot of controversies, and I hate every bit of it when it comes to disparity of how many people that don't care about it, because women do not get a lot of that respect because they don't get a lot of money. They don't get a lot of gratitude because us people just don't believe that they deserve to make more money because it's a hard job out there. And you even say to yourself, should women become Navy SEALs? That is a huge problematic problem when it comes to men and women because we're all built differently. All of us men don't know how to cook or wash or even clean the floors or even be housemaids. We don't know how to do that. Heck, even women don't even know how to become NASCAR drivers. So that's the problem. It has the disparity of problems when it comes to the weight class division and how many people that have to understand the incompetence of what makes the sport interesting for men and women to watch competition. Because it's a disparity of mechanistic that comes to the vernacular of unprecedented competition that has financial problems because there's not a lot to it, then says the I. But I digress. I do believe that women's boxing in the heavyweight division and light heavyweight division should be popular. And even though bare knuckle boxing and MMA, like Pride and even, or used to be past Pride, and UFC and Riz, and even many of the other divisions like Bellator, MMA, all have the weight classes for women's boxing to be as it is. Because there's only 5 weight classes in bare knuckle boxing for women, minimum weight, and not even welterweight. Because they don't want to make it that hard for women and grown women. And same for MMA, less weight classes. So I understand if boxing is not going to change that, then we have no choice. So I'm coming out with an idea. Now, for instance, each weight class for men and women are the similar weight class than they are in the minimum weight than they are in both weight classes from women's of the light heavyweight and minimum weight, 105 pounds and 175. The atomweight division of women's boxing comes out at 102 pounds. And separating it to the middleweight of the minimum weight and light flyweight are separated between each weight, 3 pounds. And of course, the light flyweight and flyweight are 4 pounds to 1012. And then of course, I'm sure we don't have to talk about it, 115 for super flyweight, bantamweight 118. And then after that, they have to gain up 4 pounds to the super bantamweight at 122, featherweight 126, super featherweight 130, and of course, the lightweight comes to 135 and 140 pounds for the super lightweight. So simple, huh? But here's the thing I do question. Now, I know that the women and men are going to keep the similar weight class similar, but I think we should drop it out just a tiny bit. Because the welterweight division for both genders is 147 pounds. Super welterweight, 154. 160 for middleweight, 168 for super middleweight, light heavyweight, 175. And of course, well, the cruiserweight division for men's boxing is 175 to 200 pounds. And of course, the bridgerweight title, the bridgerweight 200 to 224 pounds. And the heavyweight for men is 224. Keep that in mind. But women don't have that, thank God. But what I want to do is compromise a new compromise of weight to make it easier for women to perform in this division. So what I'm going to do is have the super lightweight changed as staying at 140 pounds for each 5 pounds to that lightweight and featherweight. So what my plan is, if I was running boxing, I would have the welterweight division drop down 1 pound from 147 to 146 to drop 1 pound. So make it from super lightweight to welterweight, that's between 6 pounds. The super welterweight, I'm going to drop it down to 2 pounds to be at 152 just to keep their weights together 6 pounds between each weight class. The middleweight, I'm going to take out 2 pounds and make it 158, then 160. And the super middleweight, well, I would say we would drop down 3 pounds and keep it at 165. But if that would be the case, or maybe 166 or so on, to make it pounds that they want to, then we should get rid of the light heavyweight division and just keep the heavyweight at 166. And then maybe we shouldn't want to have to worry about the other weight classes, keep the weights they are. If we do get rid of the light heavyweight, then we'll have the heavyweight together next to the super middleweight. But if that's not the case, what they're going to do, then I'm going to have to give the super middleweight drop down 4 pounds to 164 pounds, right between the middleweight, 6 pounds between each other. And as for the light heavyweight, same thing. I'm going to get rid of 5 pounds and make it 175 to 170. And then the heavyweight division, 170, will be the max weight of unlimited weight for women in the heavyweight. Now, is this system fair? I think it should, because it would be less confusing than to have women saying that it's okay that if you want to box under 175 pounds or over 168 at that time, then it wouldn't really matter. Because, to be honest, it makes it less confusing. And it makes it easier for some women to take care of their bodies properly. Now, keep this in mind, there's not going to be a lot of tall women in the world, because there's not a lot of tall women in the world. Unless if you talk about boxing, about basketball players like Vonda Ward, Danielle Perkins, and Shadicia Green. Keep that in mind. And also, I think she was a basketball player. No, I'm not going to say her name. But many of them have been basketball players, and they have went to boxing in their career. And as for Chi Connealy, considering she's 6 foot tall, and even other body proportion like Danielle Perkins and Vonda Ward, many of the women, due to their 6 foot heights, could stand their weight for over 70 pounds, which is why I'm saying 170 is actually a good weight for boxing. I think it's a good idea, and I think it's actually a pretty good idea, to be honest, because it actually makes it more better. And yes, you'll have some women that might be sumo wrestlers that are over 200 pounds, but we do have to keep that minimum to make it less bad for boxing, just to make it not incompetent for a lot of us people to not enjoy. But the least we can do is just try to make this a little bit less incompetent than it is. And I think that's what we should do. But my answer is this. Is there going to be an undisputed light heavyweight champion? I think after Claressa Shields and Lonnie Daniels fight each other next month in July, I believe that we'll have a good chance to see that in the future. And we'll just have to wait and see. It will be interesting, but when the time comes, it will be interesting. But after that, we'll see if Claressa Shields is going to go down and fight for the light heavyweight titles. But better yet, I do want to see the WBC belt come alive. So if Claressa Shields does get a fight for a WBC belt or something, we would like to see the light heavyweight title fight on the line. So we'll just have to wait and see. But for now, that's the end of this episode, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for watching this episode. I had a good time talking about this one, and we'll see what happens in the future. So with that being said, the Foxwell says out, and see you next time.